In Sanitation Agency, and I'm going to share my screen now for my presentation. Okay, so my presentation is called the Organic Waste and Power Receiving Program for our agency, and I gave a similar presentation a few years ago at this conference. So if any of you attended that, this will seem familiar, but it's been updated. So what I'll talk about is a little bit about the agency, and then generally about our organic waste program and how it works. And there's three components to that. There's a food waste program with the local solid waste hauler, marine sanitary service. Then we have a program where we receive fats, oils, and greases from private haulers. And then we're starting to receive other types of organic waste from other haulers, and that will be expanded into the future. So I'll focus really on the food to energy program with marine sanitary, and then just some benefits we see for the program and some various high-level metrics that we track on. And those metrics are from 2019, and I'll explain why they're a little older. And then I'll move into our power generation program, which the organic waste program is a huge part of that. And then just a little bit about what we're doing next. So we're a regional wastewater agency, and we're in the city of San Rafael, Marin County, right across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, and there's Highway 580 in that little picture there. So in this Google map, there's a bird's eye view of our facility. So really, in short, all this wastewater comes in at the top of the little map. It runs through various treatment processes and equipment. At the bottom end, the clean water flows through a big 7-foot diameter pipeline that runs about 2 miles out into the central San Francisco Bay. And everything that's removed from the water, which is wastewater sludges, are processed further, and they go into those anaerobic digesters. Those little green domes you see over by the forested area, and we produce renewable products from that. We also produce recycled water. So, we're a regional wastewater agency. We serve about half of the county of Marin. It's a small county. Our population is about, 260,000 people. We serve about 110, including San Quentin State Prison, as Lauren mentioned a moment ago. Our government structure is we're a joint powers agency, so we're very similar to a special district. And we have 4 districts that we work with on our wastewater business. And so the water that comes into the plant, it varies throughout the day and the season. So during middle of the night, about 1 million gallons of water comes into the plant, and that peaks out around 10 o'clock when everybody's up and done having breakfast and taking showers. That might be 13 million gallons per day comes in. So over the course of a day, most of the year, about 8 million gallons gets processed. Then, of course, during major rain events, we have a lot more water that comes in through cracks and sewer lines and home laterals. So like last October, remember we had that big rain event over the 19th through the 21st. We saw 129 million gallons come in for that day, which is a huge increase. That's why in this photo you see all these empty tanks, because most of the year we don't need them. And then we have contracts with 13 other local public agencies in Marin County where we provide a variety of wastewater services to help them out. So like my board and a lot of elected representatives, they like this diagram because it's kind of a nutshell what the program is. On the left, you have all this organic material, food waste, fats, oils, and grease, other types of organics. It runs through a bunch of processes, including anaerobic digestion. Then the main product is a biogas, which is like a lower quality natural gas. So like natural gas has about 95, 96% methane. Our biogas might have 64 to 66% methane. Good fuel though. So this little cartoon shows a little more detail. So you have on the left the organic wastes. They get collected. The food waste go to the solid waste haulers transfer station down the street. That's Marin Sanitary Service. And they pull out contaminants and process it. Other organics come in by tanker truck. All of that eventually makes its way into a couple anaerobic digesters. And I'll talk more about what happens there in a few slides. But there's 2 products, essentially. One's a biosolids, and we have 3 different beneficial reuses for that. And then the other product is the biogas, which with the methane content, it's a perfect fuel in an engine, which turns a generator to produce renewable power, which we use internally. and then we produce extra and we sell that to a utility. So back into 2013, this is the first fats, oils, and grease truck that came in. It's about a 5,000 gallon load. And these companies go around and they pump out grease traps and interceptors at restaurants and markets. Those can be in the kitchens, they can be out in the parking lot. Essentially, they collect all the grease so it doesn't get into the sewer systems, and these trucks pump it out. Now they can bring that to us, and they just connect that hose there you see in the diagram, and they pump it into this underground tank. You'll see the tank also has these hatches that are opened up. That's where the food waste goes in. And here's the first load of pre-consumer processed food waste that's being dumped into that tank. So every morning, a load of that comes in, maybe 8 tons. It's mixed with the fats, oils, and grease over the morning, and that's pumped over to the digesters. So this food energy program has been a great success with Marin Sanitary Service, and it's a partnership that started up back in 2008 timeframe, where we started with different planning level activities and feasibility studies, how much food waste they can collect, how much capacity we had, gave presentations to city and town councils and the board of supervisors, just getting support for the overall program, which they all thought it was great. Then we designed and built our facilities, which I'll show in a minute. But this little map here shows central Marin County next to the San Pablo Bay. And you see the area within red, that is the service area from Marin Sanitary Service. And then the area within green is our service area. So we have a lot of common customers. So not too much about their program, but essentially what they do is they collect pre-consumer food waste from restaurants and markets. And this is the food waste that's collected from kitchen activities, which has a lot less contamination or potential contamination than you have from post-consumer, which is in the eating areas. And right now they have about 218 different, food waste generators, the markets and restaurants that are in their program. But over the next couple of years, starting pretty soon, they're planning to expand their program where they collect food waste from other sources, schools and nursing homes and other types of facilities to help their local jurisdictions that they have contracts with comply with the landfill diversion regulations in Senate Bill 1383. And we have the capacity for all that too. So their program really has a lot of outreach. They hired special staff several years ago to go out and identify these eligible restaurants and facilities, train them about how they separate the food waste and contaminants, what are contaminants, what doesn't go in the containers, retrain them, monitor their performance, and so forth. So they have different, garbage cans. They have their recycled can, the blue one, which is collected separately. Then they have their solid waste can, which goes to landfill. That's black in the middle. Then they have their food waste can, which is that green one. So those stay in the kitchens. And this happy guy here, he's just scraping off the food waste into the can. Then that goes outside, and it looks that clean, which is great for us. And then a special food waste collection truck, collects that. Then it's eventually delivered to their transfer station. As I mentioned, it was about a half a mile down the street. So starting on the left, it's dumped on the floor in the transfer station. Some of their staff picks out any contaminants, plastic, bones, metal utensils, other things that can't be processed in an anaerobic digester. And then a loader picks that pretty cleaned up food waste and it dumps it on this piece of equipment you see in the middle, which is a kind of an angled conveyor belt. About half the length of that conveyor belt, there's a platform, and there's usually 1 or 2 people standing on that platform during their operation, and they can, increase the speed and decrease the speed on that conveyor belt, and they hand pull out other types of contaminants. And then that goes through a grinder system, which dumps it into that green bin there. Then a truck picks up the bin and just drives it down the street to us. And this is a picture of their food waste load. This isn't a stage photo, which you guys think. This is actually what the food waste looks like when it's dumped in their transfer station. So it's very clean material. So then this is our facility, and it's an underground, say 30,000 gallon tank. And then right next to it, closer to those trees, there's a kind of a, not underground, but it's lower than the ground level where there's various equipment. There's grinder pumps and hose pumps and piping and instrumentation and other things. So the truck, you see where the truck pulls up on that kind of concrete pad that's a little farther away from us in the picture, connects the hose there. The closest pad is where the solid waste hauler discharges. Everything's mixed, and then it's pumped to that little machine you see on the platform, and that's a screening machine. So that screens out other types of fibrous materials, little pieces of plastic and other contaminants, and that gets discharged in that green bin, and the Marine Sanitary Service picks that up. Sometimes it goes in their compost if it's contaminant free, sometimes it goes with the landfill. And at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about a project where we're expanding this facility with some above ground tankage, so we have more capacity. So from that little tank, what we do is we pump that mixed up, material slurry to one of these two digesters. So these are 1,000,000-gallon digesters. They're about 80 feet in diameter. We wish we had a third one, but they're about $10 million to build, plus or minus. So then the digesters are full of different microbes. There's different species of microbes, and they each do different types of work. And the final group of microbes, they produce the methane biogas. So that's removed from the digesters, and it runs into those two white tanks you see behind the digesters that are in the picture at the bottom of the photo of the screen. And these tanks have a material in it, kind of like a sand, but it's a carbon-based material, and it's designed to remove hydrogen sulfide gas from the biogas. That's to help comply with our air permit. Then from there, that partially clean biogas runs through some compressors, so it's pressurized. Then it flows into this little facility you see up on the left-hand side of the screen, where it runs through a heat exchanger to cool it off. Then it runs through a dryer, which then removes all of the moisture. So it's nice and dry. Then it runs through those two vertical tanks, and those have another type of granulated activated carbon type material that's designed to remove siloxanes. And siloxanes are silica-based compounds that are in toothpaste and makeup and various personal care products. You don't want the siloxanes in the combustion area of a engine, so you remove those out to minimize maintenance. So then that dry, clean gas goes to a generator. So the one at the bottom photo is the original generator we had, which is about 3/4 megawatts, Waukesha, and it's essentially an engine very similar to what's in your car, except instead of gasoline for fuel, it uses the biogas. Then it spins a shaft, which then connects to a generator, and it produces the renewable power. And we just installed this newer, about a 1 megawatt cogenerator made by Genbacher. They're from Austria. So that was just installed during the summer after about a year of work, and it's in commissioning phase right now, but it is producing power to run our facility. So at our wastewater plant, we have about 17 different little kiosks that have computer screens that show all the different areas of the plant. So we can monitor, our operators can monitor everything, they can control systems. This is a computer screen that kind of shows the organic waste receiving facility and the underground tank. So you can see all the valves and the pumps on there. Green means they're on, red means they're off. So we receive the material in the morning, usually up to about noontime. Then it's mixed together several hours, so it's nice and homogeneous. It runs through that paddle finisher, so the contaminants and screening materials are removed. And then we start slowly feeding both the digesters, usually over about 12-hour period, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And we feed each digester maybe for a couple hours, then it goes to the next digester. So we distribute the feed to both the digesters, so we don't have too much of the organic impact on either one of the digesters. Very important to maintain the health of the digesters and all those happy microbes inside. So here's some of the metric information. We measure a lot of different things and track a lot of different metrics. This is just kind of a little summary of some. And this is 2019 data. And the reason that I'm showing this old data is because it's representative for a full year of the program. In 2020, we had COVID, so a lot of the restaurants shut down, as you know. Then they started opening up. Some of them opened up, and they only had takeout service. So there's a lot less food waste being generated. They weren't generating the grease. So the feedstocks for the organic waste program was significantly reduced in 2020, started increasing in 2021. But bad news for us, one of the covers on the digester ruptured. So about 6 months it took to drain the digester, buy a new cover, install it. So we didn't have the program up and running. Then since we did that on one digester, we decided to replace the other cover, and that's just got wrapped up about a week ago or so. So this is the most current data for an entire year that's representative. So you see there's different boxes. So you have the digester health. This is some of the things that we measure. Very important to keep the digesters healthy. The two, red areas are where what we track on real close. The pH of the material, really important to keep it, around 7. If it gets too high, something bad's happening with some of the microbes inside, the acid producers. Then you have this other metric, the volatile acid versus alkalinity. Alkalinity is a buffer. So you want that to be really low. So this is really good data here. Then you have that feed little box. So the sludges we produce at the wastewater plant are the primary sludge and the thickened waste activated. That's the TWAs. Then you have the organic material. Then the last column shows the percentages of the volatile, or what can be converted to energy. So several years ago, when we were looking at expanding our power delivery or production and delivery program, we were working with a lot of consultants doing planning level studies, and they told us, well, nationally there's various studies that were done that the amount of organic material that can be co-digested with wastewater material in these digesters is only like 30 to 35%. So we are already at 30% in 2019. So we were kind of concerned about that this may be a limitation for increasing our organic waste program. So we bought a couple 600-gallon digesters, set them up on a skid, and for about 2 years, we ran a pilot study where we slowly increased the organic, content of the feed to the digesters and just monitored their health. And eventually we got up that feed rate to about 55%, which was great news for us. And then you could see the last box at the bottom there on the right is the biogas usage. So we averaged about 18 hours a day of renewable power generation. So if you look on an average week or so, maybe 4 or 5 days, we are 100% energy self-sufficient, and we delivered some power. In other days, we didn't have enough biogas. So it's about 18 hours a day on average. So here's a list of benefits that we identified for having this program. One, it is a local renewable energy project, which is great, and that aligns with a lot of the state's goals for renewable energy. It does, by diverting the organics from landfills, it complies with some of the requirements in the Senate Bill 1383, which is great. We had a lot of underutilized capacity in our digesters, like the whole digesters, capacity almost. Then we had, additional capacity in our cogenerators. So we're utilizing that unused capacity, which was already paid for with public funds. So that was good news. And we deliver renewable power to the grid and get paid for it, which is great. So now I mentioned that the organic waste program feeds into the power delivery program, which is really those cogenerators operating. So once we were starting to plan to increase organic waste, produce more power, and eventually achieve energy self-sufficiency, then start delivering some, we had to talk with the local utility in our area, that's Pacific Gas and Electric, and had to get their approval to deliver the power to the grid. And that's, that's a kind of a complicated process, and it takes a long time, and that's called an interconnection. So PG&E had to do various electrical evaluations of their transportation and distribution system. Fortunately, we didn't have to make any improvements to their system, but we had to install a lot of protective relays and other devices inside our main distribution panel, which is shown at the bottom of the slide. We installed a special meter that measured how much power we were exporting. Ultimately, after about 1.5 years of them doing their studies, us designing our improvements, contractors installing things, them witnessing that everything's working properly, we got the formal authorization, and that was called a permission to operate. We got that back in March of 2019 for the 3/4 megawatt generator. So then when we looked at installing a bigger generator, that green one from the prior slide, the Genbacher, we had to go through the whole interconnection process again. Electrical studies, design work, approval of design, installation. That took 3 years to get that done, which is a really kind of a drawn out, frustrating process. But early September this year, we received the permission to operate for the bigger generator, which was great news for us. And then once you're generating this power and you have some to deliver to the grid and you have authorization to do that, you don't really want to deliver it for free. It's better if you get paid for it, of course. So we looked at, well, who would buy the power? So that's either PG&E or Marine Clean Energy in our area. So we reviewed several of their agreements for doing that. And those are called feed-in tariffs. And they're a little complicated, and they have a lot of requirements and restrictions and other things associated with those. So we reviewed those, and we selected a tariff with Marine Clean Energy called a Small Generator Power Purchase Agreement. And we selected that because they're a public agency that's in San Rafael like us, and the administration of all those conditions is much more simplistic than working with PG&E. And the biggest issue was that we didn't have to forecast how much power we were going to deliver on a daily basis, because there's penalties if you don't deliver as much as you told them you would deliver. So with MCE, it was much easier. So we eventually received what they call a commercial operations date, and that's them telling us that we met the requirements of the agreement and they'll actually buy our power. So shortly after that, we started delivering renewable power. And that little screen from our computer system on the left shows over time. So the blue line is the power that we're generating, and the red line is the power that we're buying. So before export, we always had to buy a little power to prevent us from exporting. And then there's that date of the May 29th on the right side of the screen. At that point in time, we increased the output of the generator and we started delivering power, which is the green line, and no more importing the power. So that was a big day for us. And because now we have the new generator with higher capacity and the potential to deliver more power, we had to negotiate a new power purchase agreement. And that was just approved, end of September. And so they're buying power from us for 8.69 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a good purchase price. So in terms of like next steps, you can see this little timeline here. So all the things I've been talking about are all the way through the right-hand side. We replaced both the membrane covers on the digester, so that doesn't have to be done for another 10 years, so that won't disrupt our organic waste and power delivery programs. We're expanding, the storage of the tank, where we hired a contractor recently, and construction is going to start on installing some, concrete slabs and, above ground storage tanks and pumping mixing systems and interconnection piping and so forth. Then we're looking at hiring a consultant to design the installation of new centrifuges, and that's what we use to dewater the biosolids from the digesters before beneficial reuse. We need centrifuges that are designed to efficiently dewater co-digested material, which has the organic waste in it, so a little more efficient. And then we'll look at outreaching to other types of, food waste generators, breweries, wineries, other type facilities that produce, some type of very clean, liquid organic waste, and work with them to bring it into us so we could expand our program. And for those of you that have never seen a wastewater digester before, its cover coming off, this is kind of associated with the presentation, but I threw it in because it's kind of interesting. So on the left-hand side, you see a digester and scaffolding goes up and they're taking the cover off. Then once the cover's off, there's all the sludge inside and it's drained out. And you can see at the bottom of the right. Then people go inside and they start breaking up the sludge, and there's a belt filter press and they run through that to dewater it. Then on the left, there's some contractors inside. They're cleaning off struvite and other types of materials off the walls of the digester. Then you have some of our engineering staff making sure all the piping and the concrete is sound in the digester. Then the new cover's installed with those cranes and the people working on it. And just a couple of weeks ago, it was inflated. So that's my presentation. Thanks. Any questions?
Well, see, I had one. How much have you figured out? Like, do you get more biosolids by taking in the food waste? Or I've heard, some people say that like practically all the food waste, gets gasified, so you don't. And other people say, well, it does increase the tonnage of biosolids. Have you seen one way or the other?
Yeah, for us, we haven't. So if we look back over the last 10 years on biosolids production, as we've increased the organic waste, feedstocks, we haven't seen any clear trend of an increase in biosolids production. And part of that is because, because these huge flows that come into the plant, the sewer pipelines are oversized. So during most of the year, you get this material that settles out in the pipelines, and the rains come and it flushes all that out. So we get big loads of, settled, wastewater solids that come in that need to be digested. So during big rain years, you can see biosolids productions increasing, but not really with the food waste piece. It's driven really by, the wet weather component. But I've heard there's been several studies that I've heard that once you start feeding the anaerobic digesters with different types of organics, that the microbes get more efficient at processing or eating the wastewater solids. So it kind of balances out. I mean, that's not a very scientific answer, but no, we haven't seen an increase.
Any other questions? There may be some time at the end for questions from all three.
Sure. So I'll go and turn off my my video now.
Okay. So our next speaker is Roberta Franco, and she works at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and she's working on 5 programs for reducing methane emissions, and particularly those from dairy and livestock operations.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, today actually I'll be talking about the dairy digester development and research program though. So let me just share my screen with you. Let's see, can you see my slides well?
We can see them.
Okay, nice. Okay, so yeah, if I'm, I can start. Thank you, Lauren, first of all, for the introduction. And I'm Roberta Franco. I'm the supervisor for the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the methane emission reduction programs, which, as you can see, there are 5 of them now. And that composes the Alternative Manure Management Program, the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program, which we'll be speaking today about it. We have the CDFA side of the SB, the Senate Bill 1383, which is the methane reduction program. Then we had just developed a new research program that is called the Climate. And we also have the AB 1981, which is the organic composting waste. So first of all, before starting my presentation, I really would like to acknowledge and give thanks to my team. So we have Rosie, Alyssa, Dana, and Charles. And also like to thank our Deputy Secretary, Virginia Jameson, our Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross, and all my peers at the Office of Environmental Farming Innovation, and all the collaborators, since without your support and help, I wouldn't be speaking here today. So first of all, before I start talking about the program itself, I would like to share some statistics with you about the dairy industry in California. And that will help us kind of understand and set up the stage for why the dairy digesters will serve as a wonderful tool and can help us today and in the future in terms of methane reduction. So the dairy industry in California is the #1 in the United States. It accounts for the production of 19% of the fluid milk in the nation, and this does not count with cheese and other dairy products. We have about 1.7 million milking cows, and those are distributed across 1,250 dairies, commercial dairies across California. The milk, so the dairy and the dairy products generated, they generated actually $6.3 billion in revenue for the state of California. And more than just a statistic, I would like to point out that the California dairy sectors not only provides milk and milk products like cheese, which are highly nutritional, safe, and affordable foods for children and adults, and they play an important role on the local, national, and international food security. So this, more than just methanes and emission, this is why we produce milk and milk products. So one thing also I'd like to share, which I thought was interesting, is that we are seeing a rise in consumption per capita of dairy. And in this case, I showed the butter consumption because it's really steep. And just to show that even with the rise of dairy alternative products and other types of food, consumption per capita in the country of dairy, and definitely across the world, is still increasing. And so to show that this dairy and methane from dairies are not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So we have a lot of opportunity there to work with. So also I'd like to show you this graph to give you perspective that the dairy herd size in California has been drastically decreasing over the years. So in 2008, actually, we had our the maximum number of cows, and since then it is decreasing rapidly. But you can see that at the same time, although herd is decreasing, the production of milk is increasing over time. So what that means is that we are producing much more milk per unit of animal or per animal. And for you to have an idea, cows, nowadays, the cows produce about 24,000 pounds of milk per year, when in 1964, they used to produce only 10,000 pounds of milk per cow per year. So this is about the 225% increase in production. And what also it means that when you have more milk per cow instead of a large herd, is that you are reducing the amount of methane not only per cow, but from the whole herd. You are decreasing also the amount of feed necessary to feed the cows, and water as well. It was all win-wins. But although the previous slides are very exciting, at least for me they are, we cannot ignore the fact that agriculture still produces and emits important greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So in this slide, to the right, you can see the latest inventory, so the 15th edition of 2022, where it shows the percentage of the contribution of agriculture and forestry for the whole greenhouse gas inventory, and that represents about 9%, which is about 31.6 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. As you can see, the majority of the agriculture and forestry portion of this GHG are coming from manure management and enteric fermentation. And so you can see that so that represents about 72% of the total ag and forestry. Of the manure management, or let me start, so of the enteric fermentation, about 10.52 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent is coming from cattle. And then if we break it again this number in two pieces, we'll see that about 2.95 million metric tons of methane will come from beef cattle, so 28%, and the other 72% will come from the dairy cattle. Then on the manure management side of this, which is the 11.58 million metric ton of CO2 equivalent, we see that about 2.5% of that comes from other animals, so swine, poultry, goats and sheep. And then the remaining can also be broken down in two pieces. So 3.7% of the manure management comes from beef cattle, and the large majority of 94% or 10.86 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent comes from dairy cattle. So that's why our program really focus, and the state is really focused in the dairy sector in specifically. So what the state of California is doing about methane reduction. So we have two fronts. We have the legislative and regulatory measures, and we have the voluntary measures. So in terms of legislative and regulatory measures, we started in 2006 with the Assembly Bill 32, which required a reduction of greenhouse gases of 20% from 1990 levels by 2020. And we successfully achieved that even before the deadline. And with that, we noticed we had opportunity to do even better. And so in 2016, the Senate Bill 32 came, and it's the expansion of the EB 32, which requires a 40% reduction of greenhouse gases by levels of 1990 by 2030. So kind of on those lines, in 2014, we have passing of the Senate Bill 605, which requires the Air Resource Board to develop a plan to reduce emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, which in those includes methane, black carbon, and fluorinated gases. And then to continue our story and make more specific to livestock, in 2016, we had Senate Bill 1383, which that established a methane reduction target for California. So in the case of livestock, because those targets are for several of sectors of the state, but in the case of livestock, we must achieve a reduction of 40% methane below levels of 2013 by 2030. And if there is no progress or by some reason the Air Resource Board in conjunction with the California Department of Food and Ag sees necessary, regulations may be put in place on 2024 or later. So this is that side of the approach. In the California Department of Food and Ag, we went through offering the carrots instead of the stick so far, and we are noticing this is working really well. So we have developed two incentive programs that serve to incentivize dairy and livestock farms to reduce manure management emissions from the implementation of digesters, which is done by the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program. And we also have the Alternative Manure Management Program, which is alternative to implementation of digester. And that program, and we have both programs because although if you get per unit, the digester has a higher decrease on methane, AMP also, may be something that somebody may not have the economics to implement a digester, or the location is not appropriate, or there is not a market for the renewable energy, or just for pure preference. And so we have these two programs that we call sister programs because they work really well together. So on the front of enteric fermentation, we still don't have an incentive program in CDFA because, as you may have heard and seen, that enteric fermentation is still and mitigation strategies are still under research and being evaluated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So we still don't have an official strategy that can be put in place that is commercially available. So, but those are coming. They are moving really quickly, and as we speak, several products are being analyzed so far, And hopefully soon we'll have something for us to incentivize on that front too. So now just to give you more details about the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program. It is a competitive grant solicitation process that is administered by us at the CDFA, and has already mentioned many times, I guess. The purpose is to award funds to California dairy operations and digester developers for the implementation of dairy digesters that result in manure methane emission reductions on California dairies and minimize or mitigate adverse environmental impacts. Just a little bit on funding and duration about on this program. Actually, on October 7, we just finished the 2022 round of applications, and we awarded 14 new projects at $18.7 million. And we already, due to the budget, the passing of the Budget Act of 2022 in July, we received allocation of $48 million that will be available for the 2023 DDRDP and AMP, and that is to be given priority to AMP. So kind of how the money flows, that state general funds in this case allocates money to CDFA. CDFA does a competitive process, and then those that score higher on the rubric and do well and meet all the requirements and eligibilities are awarded the grants. So nowadays our grant amount is up to $1.6 million, and a 50% match is required. So for example, if you ask a grant that is $1.6 million, you need to contribute with another $1.6 million or more to be able to be awarded. And the project maximum duration is of 2 years. So for example, the ones that were just awarded in October, they are going to start construction and the process in January 1st of 2023, and they have until December 31st of 2024 to complete the project. This is really summarized some of the requirements, but I thought for the purpose of today, these are the main points that we should talk about. So first of all is that methane must be used for energy production or transportation fuel. So this is just to say that flaring the biogas has a sole use for the biogas produced is not eligible for funding. It is important also to note that 80% or more of the dry weight of the feedstock to be given to the digester must come from manure from dairy livestock. And that's due to, as I mentioned before, we have a target to be met by 2030. So we need to focus on dairies at the moment. Total NOx emissions cannot be greater than 0.5 pounds megawatt hour for electricity projects. So that's why sometimes, and I will show later, we have several renewable natural gas projects instead of electricity, because we are using one of the most stringent regulations for NOx here. So all projects must comply with all applicable state and federal regulations. Recipients must not change their herd size beyond their existing permits during the project term. And all the applicants must use the latest DDRDP, California Air Resource Board quantification methodology and benefits calculator to estimate GHG emission reductions and the co-benefits. So next slide, I wanted to show you how these projects are divided across the state. As you can see, it kind of follows where the concentration of dairies is in the state. So the Central Valley goes all the way from Modesto to Bakersfield. And you can see that we have funded so far 131 projects, where 130 were incentive projects and one was a demonstration project. And we awarded already $214 million to these 131 projects. We have, with these projects, and about 65% of them are ready, accounting for the ones that just join in. We are accomplishing 23 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent reduction over 10 years. And so that's not to snuff at it. About 9 projects of the whole 131 projects are electricity generating from biogas. The remaining 122 projects are for generating renewable natural gas for heavy duty vehicles. So another important thing I think to say on the slide, since we are saying talking about numbers, is that the Dairy Digester Research Development Program is the most cost-effective greenhouse gas reduction emission program funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and now the General Fund, where a metric ton of methane only costs the state $9. So it's really effective. So, well, first I show you how our digesters look like and go a little more in detail. I just wanted to show you how, how the manure flows through the system and how gas is processed. And Jason already did a great job explaining some of it, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But here in the case of California, about 75 to 80% of the dairies and those located in the Central Valley are going to use some sort of flushing with or without scraping to manage the manure in their farms. So you see that, and I'll see if you can see my arrow. So it starts here with the cows, and as you already heard from Dr. Kafka in the morning, cows and Jose, the cows can poop a lot, and so this waste is flushed. It comes to this processing pit, and there is several names for this, and it's homogeneously mixed. So everything is really across similar. And then it goes to the solid liquid separation, which for us, the majority will be this dual screen type of system. So there, and this actually, the solid liquid separation happens to all our digesters funded so far. And so portion of it, the solid fraction of it, goes to the manure pile. So this can come here on the bottom, become soil amendment, become animal bedding, or other innovative products, such as pellets or biochar or whatever your creativity can give you. The liquid portion goes then to the digester, and there is where it stays for about 30 to 45 days. And so the liquid portion after the 30 to 45 days can be used. It's called the famous digestate, and can be used as a great fertilizer to the dairy farm, or if there is a way you can export it. But yeah, very rich. The gas then produced on the digester goes through several conditioning and upgrading steps. So the first step, it's moisture removal, because since that was a biological reaction, there is a lot of water also in it. This biogas the raw biogas coming right out of the digester has an equivalent about 45 to 65% methane composition, and being the remaining CO2. And so the first step is to remove sulfur. In the case of manure digesters, we don't have much siloxane, and this has Jason mentioned before, it's more the case of food waste and other types of waste. After that, it goes to a compression process. You can, at that point, separate the biogas and you can use it for heating, electricity, or other industrial uses. And if you continue to this chain of upgrade, you should you will go to the CO2 removal and removal of other impurities, again compressed, and then you're ready to inject at your utility pipeline. So this, at this point, the renewable natural gas, which started really dirty, it's about more equal or more than 96% of methane. And then that methane, as I mentioned to you, goes for powering heavy duty vehicles. So now I'd like to share some pictures just for you to see some of our projects. So similar to that little picture before, this is a station that is one of our recipients is using to fuel trucks, heavy duty trucks that are related to the dairy industry. So this is really exciting. Then here's a picture of one of our digesters. You see it's like a we have the lagoon and it's covered with the heavy tarp, and it has a lot of sensors and systems, even though it's very simple in design. And here to the right, the bottom right, it's the CO2 removing membranes, and this is a lot of energy goes to this process. And some of our recipients are already thinking to even reuse that CO2. So that would be even greener, because instead of releasing the CO2, which actually at that point is carbon neutral because those cows ate those plants that did photosynthesis, you are even closing the cycle by using that CO2 instead of emitting back to the atmosphere. There's other set of pictures. It's our developer that has installed a 2 megawatt fuel cell in their farm. So they are really far from the pipeline, but they still wanted to, be part of the movement and have a digester and produce renewable energy. So they installed these fuel cells, which are extremely clean. They do not emit any criteria pollutants or anything, and they are working so well that they are talking about having a hydrogen facility close to this, because then at the same time you are producing electricity and making hydrogen out of that biogas. So it's really exciting. And I'm almost finishing. Here is a picture of the upgrader facility. So this is when the gas from the dairies, they all come here, and it's where it's the sending to the utility. So here, if you see inside the fence, you have another fenced off place where is the utility portion of it. So after removal of CO2 and compression and so forth, you can send it to the utility, which is then to the general population. And here the utility will do measurements instantaneously and see if the gas is meeting specifications. So if it's not good, they send it back down the line to further cleaning. If it is good, it goes back, it goes to the pipeline. And one more or two more slides is that these projects are not just being beneficial in terms of methane reduction, but they also provide several other co-benefits. So I'd like to show you that we accurately measure through the calculator tool, and even the tool, it's kind of on the conservative side, but that's okay, because even like this, we have really good numbers to show you. So the calculator tool, we started to measure co-benefits since 2019. So that's actually just half of our projects are being accounted on these numbers. We have the other ones since 2015 that are not being accounted. So The calculator has given us that these projects have, since 2019, have reduced 1,500,000 gallons of fossil fuel. About 102 billion gallons of renewable fuel have been produced since then, and that is equivalent to 22,000 vehicles being removed out the roads every year for at least 10 years. The projects that produce electricity have generated 565 million kilowatts hour of electricity, and that's the equivalent of light, or giving electricity to 7.8 thousand homes per year for at least 10 years. Then we have the criteria pollutant reductions, which is really exciting. So we have reactive organic gases reducing in this amount, have nitrogen oxides, the local PM 2.5, and diesel PM, because we substituted diesel with renewable natural gas. And since all the digesters have that solid liquid separation, we produced about 32,000 tons of composting. And all these projects, and again, since 2019, not even before, have produced 4,379 full-time jobs, which you can see here, the breakdown. Yep, so that's for me. And thank you for having me. And please don't feel shy to reach out if you have any questions about our programs.
And we had one question from Jacob Collins, but it sounds like it might be for all three of you. We'll do that question at the end, Jacob. We'll try doing that at the end.
Okay.
And our next speaker is Cassandra Ferrant. She's the head of environmental credit at AMP Americas, and she has been working for 15 years on the air quality and greenhouse gas emission consulting, and she handles credit compliance and new project development. So Cassandra, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra, and I'll be talking about what the last two presenters had been talking about as well. It's an exciting field that we're going into, but manure digestion to low carbon fuel. It's not letting me.
Cassandra, I can pull up your slides.
Okay, that would be great. If you can see them. So for, as I said, I'm with AMP America. We've been around for over 10 years. We have multiple dairy to low carbon fuel facilities across the United States, and we supply fuel into California for transportation fuel and making green hydrogen and other uses as well. So you can go to the next slide. Our vision is to make 100% renewable fuels. Although as I'll talk about today, we're a primary dairy digester company that makes dairy RNG. Our goal is to reduce methane from the atmosphere and create a carbon benefit for that. As we do, we own, operate, and build our own portfolio of assets, as well as deal with other third parties who do RNG from organic waste, landfill gas, or co-digestion. Next slide. We are a leader in the United States on US dairy to RNG facilities. We had some of the first facilities built and certified under the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, as well as the RFS program. Our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we do create a negative carbon intensity fuel from dairy RNG. So we're not only just displacing fossil fuel, but we're removing methane from the atmosphere that would have happened, creating a negative carbon intensity score. Next slide. So what is evaluated for a low carbon fuel? We look at the life cycle emissions for the fuel. So that would be the well to wheel type model that CARB uses using the simplified CI calculators, or if you're thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act that just came out this year, they use a well to gate model with the GREET 2.0 model to calculate that. When looking at that, we look at the baseline and project emissions. The baseline is looking at the emissions that would have occurred. And on the image here is an example of what California uses for their compliance offset protocol for their boundaries. But it's an example of what is looked at, included in a well-to-well analysis of how the manure is collected, how the manure is treated, as the previous presenter discussed, and the process it goes through. And so we look at everything from the generation of manure, collection of it, processing of that manure, the end result of where that digestate then goes, their field application, bedding, it's usually used for beneficial use and has additional uses that then also displaces other materials that were being used, such as fertilizers or straw or bedding that maybe have used previously. We then look at the project emissions that are associated with taking that raw biogas and turning it into renewable natural gas, the electricity use, natural gas use, any combustion or use of that fuel on site as well. And that together in those models is used to calculate the carbon intensity of that fuel. We typically think about that in total grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per megajoule. Next slide. So for the baseline emissions, we look at what was currently happening at the farm prior to a project going in place, as well as the total avoided methane that is going to occur. That is being done. We look at how the manure was being managed. Did it go to a lagoon? Was it used for bedding, composted, dry lotted out in the field? These are all the things that go into the model to calculate what methane would have occurred without our project. It should be noted that dairy projects all are in line with a farm's operation, and the farm does not change how it is doing day-to-day operations based off the project. It's the manure is received and then typically sent back to them. It's just a small facility within the larger farmer's operations, and those don't change based on us coming to help reduce emissions. I did provide some examples of different models that are used to calculate the carbon intensity, but could also be used to calculate the total avoided methane. In California, there's the compliance offset protocol. Federally, we use the ANL GREET model, and then in California for the low carbon fuel standard, we use the Tier 1 simplified calculator, specifically here for dairy and soy. Next slide. So project emissions are the emissions that go into running and operating our facilities. This would be electricity use for running the membrane systems, for the compressors, the knockout tanks, everything that the gas needs to be processed through. Natural gas is used to ensure that our digesters are operating properly, depending where your facility is located. There's different types of digesters. Some digesters are just a lagoon cover, or other digesters are enclosed vessels. And in enclosed vessels, we want to ensure we have the right temperature year-round to ensure we have the right anaerobic conditions to ensure appropriate biogas creation. So those are all items that go into project emissions. We also look at any biogas or natural gas that could be used. So if you have excess biogas, we could be using it on site as well. Or if there's biogas that meets injection specifications, if that's destroyed on site, that is taken into account as well. But we also look at the fugitive emissions. So we've captured all this methane, and some of it does get out. And so, those are taken into account when calculating emissions. And main ones are feed loss, venting emissions, any gas that is not captured. A lot of these emissions are calculated based on models or based off of a mass balance to ensure that we're getting a true picture of what the carbon intensity of the fuel is. Next slide, please. So for biogas collection. Once we have the gas from the digester, and this is the same for any type of feedstock that you have, not just dairy RNG, but wastewater treatment plants, landfills, anaerobic digestions of organic waste. They, once the gas is collected, it's normally for dairies between, we normally say 52 to 65% methane. That manure goes through the process for approximately 20 to 30 days in the digester, then it comes out. We do take that digested material. It is used for a variety of reasons, beneficial use. And then we take that material and it is the biogas, and we do upgrade it. The upgrading process is basically removing the hydrogen sulfide as well as carbon dioxide and any moisture that's in the gas to get a material that is equivalent to natural gas, at approximately 98% methane. That gas can be used for multiple things. Anything that natural gas is being used for, we could use RNG for instead and be delivered in the same fashion. So a fleet fueling at a station for CNG can fuel up with RNG, or it could be provided to our power plant or a refinery to make green hydrogen, or many different uses as well. It can also go directly to electricity production. Instead of upgrading, though, you can also send the raw biogas to fuel cells or jet engines to make electricity directly as well and have low carbon intensity of electricity for use as well. Next slide. So when you're looking at the whole process, we go from having a biogas form to RNG, renewable natural gas, and that's the final byproduct typically of these types of projects. And the whole idea is that we've removed methane that would have been emitted, so we're taking a big step forward in meeting California's goals under AB 32 and SB 1383 and other rules, as well as displacing natural gas or diesel or gasoline that would have been used. In transportation, RNG is typically used to decarbonize heavy-duty fleets. So those are fleets that electric vehicles are not available for, large trucks or agriculture or other uses. And those fleets can easily switch over to a CNG fleet and a renewable CNG fleet. Next slide. So turning avoided emissions to the large common fuel, as I said, gets you to about 98% methane renewable natural gas. And that can be injected into the utility pipeline and sent anywhere that the pipes connect. And so anywhere nationally, gas can be sent. So it can be used to help decarbonize anywhere, all different industries and all different things. In the future, hopefully it can go to utilities. Will start purchasing it more to go to homes, and industry, and not just transportation fuel, but there's so many uses for it. The main items that, when we're getting to that 98% methane are really trying to remove those other items of hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide. As I said, that carbon dioxide, our AMP is working on multiple projects to capture that and use it for beneficial use or inject it as well, which would be taking additional carbon dioxide, which would be considered a biogenic carbon dioxide source, and removing it from the atmosphere as well, which would be additional benefit to the climate. Next slide. So as you can see here, California uses emissions come into a large variety of sectors, and I've highlighted all the areas that AMP currently supplies renewable natural gas, which is reducing fossil fuel use in those industries. So it's from the refining process, that includes green hydrogen manufacturing, agriculture, electrification. AMP does have a biogas to electricity project where we do make low carbon CI from the biogas directly on site and put it on the grid for use. Heavy duty transportation, forklifts, these are all examples of things that where AMP is helping reduce methane emissions and carbon dioxide emissions from the atmosphere. Next slide. So when talking about low carbon fuels, they're all measured based on their carbon intensity. As I said earlier, dairy RNG is a negative fuel. As you'll see on the middle of the slide, you'll see the green circles are where dairy RNG CIs typically lie. The bottom one is first rate RNG or CNG replacing CNG. And then the top one is if you're going to use dairy RNG for hydrogen production to make green hydrogen. And then the orange ones are where your standard fossil fuel gases are. You'll see the standard fossil fuel CI is around 100 grams of CO2e per megajoule, while dairy RNG on its own ranges typically between -150 and -600 as shown, and then reduces the hydrogen again from a positive to a carbon neutral to negative CI score as well. And RNG is the only gas that's currently available to help with this process. And the green ones are where, AMP is currently doing it. Dairy RNG can also be used for LNG as well. You just take the CNG and then make it a liquefied compressed natural gas to then be used. And it's just slightly more energy intensive. Next slide. So AMP has been doing this for over 10 years. We were the first dairy RNG to provide fuel to the RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard, to make RINs. We were the first RNG to fuel project to be certified by CARB and get a pathway. We had one of the lowest CI score initially when the program was being started back then. And we are currently building new projects as we speak. So we are working on expanding and investing and trying to remove emissions from the atmosphere all over. In 2022, we are projected to have removed approximately 500,000 metric tons of CO2e from the atmosphere and converted that to a low carbon fuel. Next slide. So here's a map of some of the locations of our assets. We are developing projects across the United States, not only to work in California's programs, but to work in new programs that will be coming up and are developing, as well as we are working on developing a California project as well. It's one of our important goals for this year. And on the right, you can see some pictures of some of our facilities and what they look like. Next slide. And I think that's it. So any questions?
See, Steve McCorkle had a couple questions. Let's see, I guess one of them's mainly for Roberta, I think, but it says if the digestate is land applied, does it calculate, does the calculator account for the additional GHG emissions from the land application?
So no, the calculator does not calculate for the land application of digester or the manure in the case of the alternative manure management. That portion is still under study to see what is the effects of manure versus digester being applied to the soil. So yeah, still in progress.
For projects that do partake in the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, we do report the emissions associated with the end use of that, though. So it depends on at which stage you're applying it to the land. So we do report it, and it does have it has defaults that go in and calculate the project emissions associated putting it, if it goes back to an effluent pond, if it goes for bedding, if it goes to land application or goes to solid storage. And we do, some of that is calculated it is calculated for all projects that do report to CARB under the LCFS program.
And Steve had another question. Has AMP considered gas to liquids technologies to convert the anaerobic digester biogas directly to diesel and SAF, sustainable aviation fuel products?
I'm sure our engineering team is probably looking at that and talking about it now. If you had more questions about that, like feel free to reach out, and I could set you up with the right people to talk about that.
Okay, and we had a question from Jacob Collins from Listec, and let's see, he says, is it true that if we were able to reuse all organics produced in California as soil amendments or fertilizer, it would still be less than 1% of the fertilizer needs to produce food in current California agricultural production system? And why is it so hard for growers to access these reusable projects and regulations or marketing? What? Take a stab at that?
Dr. Kafka was just here this morning, and part of that report that he has produced, which was funded by us at the California Department of Food and Ag, I think is a little higher than that, because just the excess of manure from even the dairies on the high priority zone 1 of the if you get all their excess of nitrogen, we were accounting for about 5 to 7% of the need for nitrogen. And these are like those dairies already had fulfilled their own needs, and so just the excess. So, and I'm thinking now with food waste and others, but I'm not familiar with food waste, but yeah, I'm thinking it's a little higher than that number.
And see, I got a message that Mary Garaudo is raising her hand. Jose, do you want to let her speak? Or
Mary, if you have a question, you can talk if you want to ask your question. She's
Okay.
raised her hand, but she's not talking.
Okay, well, you can also type it in under Q's and A's.
Yeah, Mary, you can also ask your question using the Q&A feature.
Okay, other questions? I guess I have, well, one remark for Cassandra, or for all of you, you know, I saw data that the production of manure was going up in California. I'd also heard from other people that more dairies were moving out of California, but that it looks from your data like there's actually more. Have you heard both sides of that, or any of you?
I don't know if Cassandra, you want to go first.
You know, the dairy market is like any market where there is movement, you know, and based on need. It's not that if you look, you know, smaller dairies like many agricultural industries are moving to larger farms due to market pressures that are outside of the low carbon fuel space and what's happening. And so family dairies are often family owned, and as they pass down from generation to generation, it's very common to see changes. You know, I've seen many, I have seen dairies leave the state, but I don't have any backup information to provide expert opinion on that.
And yeah, I just wanted to kind of tag along in your answer, Cassandra, that yeah, we are seeing, and now we have Sigma and other water regulations that are really going to affect, I think, more than methane reduction, which we are on path. We think we are going to meet the 40% reduction by 2030, but if we don't have water to farm, then I think we will have problems on keeping these dairies in California. So yeah, for us at least, we are seeing a trend, and like Cassandra said, a consolidation of the herd So smaller dairies kind of migrating, and that has been happening for more than 40 years. It's not like a new thing. It's just a trend. Like we used to have 18,000 dairies in California back in the 60s, and now we just have 1,250. So that is a lot of consolidation happen. But there is also, and CARB put a really nice report in the beginning of this year showing the trends that the herd size is also going to decrease in California. So consolidation and herd decreasing. That's, I think, the future.
Yeah, and one thing to note is in California currently and federally, there's no requirement to collect methane emissions. So a lot of the regulations that would try to drive farmers out of the state aren't set with air quality. They are set to other items such as water and other things, reasons, costs that and items that go there for a variety of reasons. Most farms, to one of the previous questions, for any fertilizer that, or any manure that goes to farm land application for farming, farms always use it themselves first prior to selling it based on need. And so, normally it would go for their own crops, to grow crops to sell or to feed the cattle directly, or that manure would go to bedding instead of buying bedding for the cows as well. So a lot of the on-site use is being used and goes into something prior to looking at what excess is being sold into the marketplace.
For any of you, do you see future funding sources? Roberta had talked about some of the current or the ones that they have, grant money for the next couple of years.
So the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, has significant funding for renewable projects that include dairy RNG, as well as other types. There are thresholds and requirements in there, but they are tax-based incentives primarily, but are expected to draw and create new projects throughout the United States.
Any other questions?
I was going to mention, like our project, you saw that new cogeneration system that's installed. The commissioning probably won't be wrapped up until after the first of the year, so it will be eligible for IRA funding, which is a good thing, and probably the investment tax credit. But it's going to be another, months before the U.S. Treasury has those regulations and applications, prepared. And so we're, as a public agency, we won't receive any tax, credits, but they do have a direct pay program too, which would be about the same amount as the tax credit value. So we're looking forward to that.
Other questions? Any final points any of you want to make?
I enjoyed learning about dairy operations. That was really educational.
Good.
The same to you. I really enjoyed your presentation and Cassandra's presentation as well.
No, it was very educational, and I live in San Rafael, so I drive past the plants all the time. So
Come by for a tour then.
Yeah. We can compare power generation for different plants.
Okay, well, we'll take a break until 3:15, and then the second portion of the treatment processes and siting, Chuck White will handle that. So see you all back at 3:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're spotlighted, Chuck. We're good to go.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
Good. When do I start? Right now?
Yes.
Well, welcome everyone to session number 4 of our conference, which I believe is going quite well. A number of different topics that we have covered. We got a few more to cover before the day is over, but don't forget we're going to be starting up again tomorrow. I'm Chuck White. I'm a senior advisor with Manette Phelps and Phillips, LLP. We are mostly a law firm, but we also do help clients on consulting issues on navigating California legislative and regulatory requirements. My focus is on energy and environmental issues. I spent many years working for the state of California. I spent many years working for waste management. And I tried to retire in about 2015, but I just couldn't do it. And I'm still enjoying myself and trying to get as much done in moving things forward, like trying to find more exciting and interesting and profitable uses for organic material that has historically been largely wasted. And there's so much going on right now. It's just been amazing. I spent 2 weeks ago, I spent 2 days in San Francisco with the ABLC next conference, which is the Advanced Bioenergy Leadership Conference that is sponsored in part by Biofuels Digest. And it's just amazing. There's about 4 or 5 years ago, there was maybe 35 participants over the 2-day conference. And this last couple of weeks, there was 750 attendees attending 2.5 days worth of conferences with 4 overlapping sessions. And there was about 100 different topics being covered during that 2.5 days. And it ranged all the way from energy, bioenergy, to biomaterials, to bioproducts. It's just amazing what a boom is happening right now in investments in these kinds of technologies as we try to steer ourselves away from relying on fossil materials to produce products and energy and services that we need and become used to. And it's really encouraging to see what is all happening out there. And for this session, I am going to ask 3 folks that are well known in their respective areas. Uzziah Hunt is with Pacific Biochar, and I don't know that much about biochar, but I'm about to learn. It is used to really increase agricultural and productivity of soils and help keep carbon in the soils rather than in the air. Next, I'll come back to Uzziah in just a second. After that, we have Michelle Applegate, who is with the Canary project, and they are in the process of trying to encourage there to be greater monitoring of all methane emissions, focusing initially on fossil methane emissions to minimize the impact on climate change and global warming, but also on biomethane to ensure that if we are producing these better than fossil fuel products, making sure they don't have the same kind of consequences. And Michelle will tell you about what their plans are. And then wrapping up our 1.5 hour or so session is going to be Steve Wertel. Now, we had Steve with Core Industries here last year, and it's an interesting issue, one of which I've been very much interested in over the last 20 years, is how can we more effectively and efficiently recover energy from waste organic material or any kind of waste product. And Steve was here last year and talking about their core gasification project that's in LA. And they're taking municipal solid waste and using gasification type technology to produce fuels and energy and this kind of thing. And you say, well, how can that happen? California's got a very difficult. Well, Steve's doing it by doing an RD&D project. And the thing I'm interested in looking at Steve's project and his company is how are they going to be able to provide is this RD&D project, evidence that these kinds of technologies can be expanded to more than just R&D projects, but can maybe play a much larger role in managing our organic wastes and our municipal solid waste. So I'll come back to each of them. In fact, I'm going to return right now to Uzziah Hunt with Pacific Biochars. Let me see if I think I have a little more about Uzziah. Uzziah is actually, are you still in Hawaii, Uzziah?
No, I'm California based.
Okay, good. Well, for a long time, his resume said he was from Hilo in Hawaii with a BS degree in agroecology and environmental quality. And he lived on the Big Island, I guess it is, and he developed pioneered methods for biochar production, processing, and application. And he's managed to bring that over to California. I suspect you're finding there's a much more, there's a big demand for your product, and we're about to hear more about it. So, Uzziah, take it away, please.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction, Josiah Hunt. I'm the founder and CEO of Pacific Biochar Benefit Corporation. We are a California benefit corporation, which is essentially a C Corp for tax purposes. And we produce biochar right here in the state. And here in the state of California, my company registered the first biochar carbon credits in all of North America at a facility, a bioenergy facility right here in California. I'll go ahead and do a presentation share and tell you more about it. All right. So what is biochar? Effectively, it's biomass charcoal, which is even redundant in that because charcoal is from biomass. So biochar is charcoal. That's it. But there had to be a new word because attached to this material became a concept with ideas of climate change mitigation and long-term soil productivity. And those concepts just couldn't be held in with the word charcoal, so they had to come up with a new word. It's been around for a long time. As long as fire and plant life have coexisted, biochar has been part of soil development. And in the past, 20 years or so, there has been a proliferation of research. A lot of this driven by, again, the climate change mitigation and agricultural productivity. I love this article. It's a systematic review of 26 global meta-analyses. So, there's more than 20,000 research articles. They're now doing review articles of the meta-analyses articles. So pretty powerful stuff here. This represents enormous amounts of research showing that there's in general benefits in crop yield, in water use efficiency, in additional soil organic carbon development, in available phosphorus, plant nitrogen uptake, reductions in greenhouse gas emissions of nitrous oxide, as well as reductions in plant uptake of heavy metals. So a lot of benefits of the material in ag. And then I'm telling you, it's a doozy here. There's a lot wrapped up in the whole concept of this biomass charcoal material that we now call biochar. So the whole concept is that we're utilizing waste materials. There are piles of biomass so large now we call it waste. So we can utilize this waste material in an energy positive process. So that waste material becomes incredibly hot, releasing gases. Once it becomes really hot, that biomass basically can break into two fractions. You get your gas fractions, and then you have the material that stays as charcoal. Those gas fractions are energy. It's combustible as basically a natural gas, which can be combusted for electricity, or if you want to get really fancy, potentially make some renewable natural gas or drop in fuels. But that gets pretty crazy to try and do that. So mostly what we're doing is just generating electricity. So in this energy positive process, we generate the charcoal material, and this charcoal material is a changed form of carbon. The carbon that remains is a new form, this form of charcoal that is recalcitrant, meaning it can resist decay for hundreds of years. As long as you put it somewhere safe. You could burn it, but as long as you sequester it somewhere safe, such as plowing it into the soil, it will stay there for hundreds of years. And other uses could be asphalt and concrete for materials that have potential contamination. Of course, here with the outcomes of, let me minimize that, with the outcomes of, food security, water conservation for generations, and carbon sequestration beyond 100 years. So it's a durable carbon removal. So that's what I'm telling you, that all that's kind of packed into this word called biochar, the term biochar. Why is it not advancing? Okay, here we go. So this is what my company is doing. There's a lot of different ways to make biochar. My company has really been focusing on modifying existing bioenergy facilities. Certain types of biomass power plants can be modified to co-produce biochar. So that's what we do. We modify biomass power plants to produce biochar. This causes either an electrical reduction, an electrical output reduction, which is not favorable, or an increase in the biomass input, which is favorable, particularly here in California, where we have a glut of forest biomass waste. So this is a plant here in California where we are utilizing forest residues and producing biochar. The biochar produced just simply loads into standard trucks. This is a live bottom belted trailer. Oftentimes it lands at compost yards where there are some synergies, but ultimately most all of it's going out to the field. This is one of California's largest vineyard management companies at a field in Salinas Valley, where the biochar has been part of a field trial for more than 6 years, showing significant benefit. And now this company is utilizing biochar in most all of their new vineyard deployments. How do we make this whole thing work? So the whole basis of my company, as it took me a while to figure out, is that this simple statement: when the carbon is worth more in the ground than it is in the furnace, a business we might have. So we have to make that true, and we have to make it true at scale, because this charcoal material, it's as good as anthracite coal, basically. We could burn it for energy, or we could put it in the ground. My company has to make this worth more in the ground than it is in the furnace, otherwise we're going to burn it. So we make that true with agricultural sales, and now with carbon credits. So we survived barely for more than a decade on ag sales alone. And I feel like that decade was kind of like a proof of concept, while my company and many others were doing a lot of research and development on how to make this work and how to make it work at scale. And then as of recently, there are carbon dioxide removal credits in voluntary markets that are supporting our ability to actually grow and to scale this at commercial scale. This is a really important part here, that as the price of carbon goes up, it becomes viable for biochar to be an ancillary product. And at some point, with a sufficiently high price of carbon and a sufficient demand, not just the voluntary, I think we'll have to, well, more on that, but if there's a sufficient price and sufficiently stable demand for that price of carbon, then at some point the energy could become the ancillary product in some of these facilities. This is the registry landscape for the voluntary market. This is how we're helping make this happen. There's published protocols and there's active platforms for trading. IPCC actually has a intergovernmental panel on climate change, has a carbon accounting methodology for biochar. Find that interesting. Here's just a snapshot of active and idle biomass power plants in California. Not every single one of these is ripe for being modified for biochar production, but many of them are. There's 24 active plants in California. That number varies depending on how you filter it. 163 in the US, and the global capacity is 81,963 megawatts or thereabouts. So just in modifying existing infrastructure, there's quite a bit of a runway there before we even have to build anything brand new. This is at Humboldt Sawmill. This is one of the places, this is one of our pioneering facilities where we're producing biochar right here in California, and also the site where we registered the first carbon credits for biochar in North America. We're continually producing biochar at this facility, utilizing forest residues and sawmill residues. This is one of 2 sites in Georgia that we're going to be bringing online pretty soon here with biochar production. And this is another site here in California where we're going to be bringing online, hopefully in the first quarter of next year, which I'm really excited about this facility because it's almost exclusively tier 1 high fire hazard forest biomass that is utilized at this facility. There's 4 more in the Western US that we're hoping to bring online sometime in 2023. That's just kind of a snapshot of like how this is growing. And this is kind of our expected carbon dioxide removal run rate growth schedule. We're doing this with a pretty small team. Thank you very much. I know that that's just kind of a snapshot of what we're doing, and I just kind of felt like I wanted to go through that fast. We could get an idea of what we're doing and what biochar is, because I feel like the interesting part will probably come in the discussion. So open for questions anytime.
Yeah, why don't we have a few questions now? If no one else steps up right now, we can do some more at the end, but I have a couple I'm holding here for you. So we'll see if there's anybody out in the audience that would like to ask a question right now. I'm not sure I know how to see if anybody is, but I'm sure someone will let me know.
There's no questions right now from the Q&A that I can see.
Okay, well, I'm a proud member of the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Club has for many years raised concerns about biomass energy because they feel we're harvesting trees, or they feel that we're harvesting trees that should be allowed to grow. And I was wondering how much of a concern that is from your standpoint of producing a biochar. I mean, you made the comments you're producing mostly for thinning forest to prevent wildfires. But do you run into this argument from various organizations that we're harvesting biomass rather than using waste biomass?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the argument, and for none of the facilities that we work with is that even remote possibility. Harvesting the biomass, going out there and harvesting the trees is a lot more expensive. There's lots and lots and lots of waste material to be dealt with first, and 2, it's problematic in many ways. And thankfully, in California, there's a pretty robust regulatory system to ensure that kind of those kind of activities wouldn't happen. That we're not out there just cutting down trees to make biochar. If it was just like magically expensive, particularly, I think that, and if there was not a regulatory landscape to mitigate the potential for negative outcomes, I think those concerns would need to be dealt with more quickly. But at least, particularly where we're at, there's just not enough money in it to support going out and chopping down perfectly fine trees. And there's a very robust system of regulatory compliance. There is an incredible amount of forest residue, just waste material, particularly for the fire hazard reduction and from the fire cleanup, as well as PG&E power line clearing and sawmill residues. So just from those resources alone, there's just an incredible amount of resources. And an additional layer is that in the carbon credit registration process, there are very strict guidelines as to what can and can't be used to specifically address that concern. And so if we were not able to meet those guidelines, we'd be missing out on the key element that's making it possible for us to survive as a company. So with those in place, those concerns I feel are pretty well addressed.
I drive up and down Highway 50 to Lake Tahoe quite a bit, and I drove down there last night in the snowstorm, but I could still see the remnants of that fire, the Caldor fire that's still there. And boy, it sure would be nice if we could make beneficial use of those forest residues, because they're not going to be growing anymore. They're dead.
You nailed it. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide the maximum benefit pathway for some of this waste residue. There's no need to go cut down trees that are perfectly happy where they are. There's so much waste to be dealt with first. And we think that by taking some of this waste organic material and transforming it into this fixed form, which can serve as carbon removal and long-term soil fertility, it is one of the most beneficial, like human and ecosystem beneficial pathways to utilize that material.
Yeah, and is there anything you're doing that would help support the reforestation efforts? I mean, I can understand taking away the dead trees and use them for biochar and energy, very low carbon energy. But what about restoring those burned forests that you remove the trees from? Is there some aspect of your operations that can facilitate that?
Primarily, I think that the biggest lever to help in that, I think, is that we are helping provide a pathway for those residues to go. Because currently they're like just in the Tahoe Basin, I'm not sure how much there is in California, but just in Tahoe Basin, there is 750,000 burn piles that will be just lit on fire and burned in place, leaving a burn scar on the ground, letting all that CO2 evaporate in the air, and without any emissions control that would reduce your soot, methane, or nitrous oxide emissions from those. So that's it. I mean, if we can just start making a small dent in reducing those burn piles and give them an alternative pathway, we're doing pretty good. And so that's the biggest lever to help the cleanup. As far as the biochar going back out into the forest, they are using biochar as part of the potting media in the saplings that are replanted. That's already kind of happening, and it amounts to a very small amount, but it is a little bit of a return to the field.
I see Dan Noble has his hand raised. I'll probably hold my other questions I have for you until the end if we have time. Dan?
Okay, thanks. Yes. So you mentioned, Josiah, that, and by the way, thank you for adjusting your schedule so you could show up. It's great. That when you were trying to get the price of biochar to be higher than energy, but energy prices seem to going up. And when you're trying to get energy off of the biochar unit, is there any benefit to that in terms of the capital costs of trying to capture the energy? Because you got to effectively burn it in a low oxygen environment, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, it's a really tricky relationship between biochar and the energy. The production of biochar is exothermic, right? So you are generating. You can have a biochar production facility which is optimized for producing as much biochar as possible, and it will still generate electricity.
Right.
But every ton of biochar that you harvest could have been burnt to produce even more electricity.
Right.
So at some point, the equation comes that would we be better off installing a few more solar panels and wind turbines to generate that extra little bit of energy? And so that's part of the equation. And generally, with the equation that we have to make fit is that the biochar has to be worth more than the waste feedstock that would replace it.
Gotcha.
So the cost of biomass replacement is basically, that's the number that we really have to meet or exceed, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, and that's tells me that when you look at local economies, it's almost somewhat of a competition or a trade-off, more of a competition, it seems to me, between the energy market, the green energy market, versus the soil or the green ag and soil market. And yet, so yeah.
Generally, biomass power is not the cheapest form of power. In
Sure.
very few cases can it outcompete wind or solar. And in fact, in California, many of the biomass power plants that are still in operation are partly in operation because of a California state subsidy that helps. It forces PG&E to purchase power from a certain minimum amount of megawatts. But it says, all right, if you want part of that contract where you get a good rate from PG&E, you shall utilize no less than 80% designated high fire hazard material. So it's basically the state was having trouble figuring out what to do with all this high fire hazard forest biomass. And they realized that some of these bioenergy facilities were some of the best currently existing pathways to utilize this material. And that if they went out of business, the state would be in even bigger trouble than they already are. So they helped create a subsidy to keep a certain key locations in operation if and only if they utilize that high forest biomass material. And there's still an excess of forest biomass material to be dealt with. So by producing a little bit of biochar in combination, we can marginally increase the throughput at a given facility and help increase the ability to utilize that excess forest biomass.
Great, thank you. I know Chuck probably wants to move on to the next speaker.
Well, actually, I have another question, much related. I'm not going to hold the end. I'm going to right when I was last heavily involved in bioenergy facilities, they were falling off the so-called cliff because they were getting reduced financing from the power facilities. I think there used to be something like 38, even maybe 40 biomass facilities in California. Now that, as you pointed out, they're down to 26. Now that this biochar option has come along, is this going to be helpful in keeping some of these biomass energy facilities operational and maybe potentially bring more back online?
We are now in the early stages of being able to answer that question. Yeah, and when it was ag sales alone that was driving it, I think there was no reasonable way that we could actually make a dent. Now that we are getting the voluntary carbon markets to help support, now I think there's a reasonable pathway. And I think the big step would be those voluntary markets are hard to be heavily reliant on because they're voluntary and they can disappear. And so larger kind of institutional, state, federal, or international level guarantees on that carbon removal credit for biochar would definitely help ensure that the biochar could play a role in that.
Well, I've got another question related to that, but I'm going to hold it off until the end and give the other speakers a chance. But you're not leaving, are you?
I'll stick around.
Good, I appreciate that. Well, next up we have Michelle Applegate, whom I've recently met, and they've got a really interesting company called the Canary Project, and I guess it makes sense as a name because it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine, which I'm sure Michelle will make some reference to. But they're kind of building on a matter that the Environmental Defense Fund has been really highlighting, and also has European Union and various other European countries to encourage the monitoring of methane and making sure that a minimal amount of methane is being produced both from fossil and biomass operations. And I think the EDF estimates that about a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions could be affected if all methane was reduced to 0.2% of the overall methane that's being produced. And it's not 100%, but it's very low. And they would be going a long way to really addressing climate change. Well, lo and behold, I think somebody at Canary read the EDF report and said, I think there may be a business opportunity here. So that's what we've done. I think the initial focus of Canary is on fossil fuel emissions of methane. But I mean, think about it. It's just a matter of time before those fossil fuel methane emissions are going to be gone, but we're going to be worried about bioenergy methane emissions and things like landfills and things like compost and things like other types of operations and dairies, for example. So Michelle, would you take it over from here and let us know what Project Canary is up to?
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for the time today. I'm really happy to be a part of this panel and excited to share some information with you all. Project Canary is a B corporation. We are actually based in Denver, Colorado, and we buy into this idea that methane is a pretty dangerous, short-lived pollutant. And we think that there's something that can be done by providing technology to the fossil and bioresources industries to be able to measure and therefore mitigate their methane emissions in the upstream. And so Project Canary was started about 3.5 years ago by folks who felt that it was important to start there. And what we've really found in the industry is that both the fossil and the bio areas of this industry, of the oil and natural gas industries, are already taking steps in these ways. And they're getting pressure from a variety of outputs across the marketplace. Largely, we're seeing investors requiring it. We are seeing sustainability-linked lending. We're seeing stakeholders and shareholders demand ESG goals in the fossil areas. And we're seeing the increase of environmental disclosures and required environmental disclosures. My area, I'm actually over our public policy for all 50 states, regulation, state policy, all the way up and down. So everything from federal all the way down to our county commissioners are making decisions on energy policy that impact how we measure and monitor the emissions that are coming off of these industries. And then we really have our operators and our consumers. You know, consumers are starting to stand up and say, we really want to understand where our energy comes from and how we are handling the environmental effects of our energy. And this is driving LNG exports. It's driving utilities who purchase a significant amount of natural gas. And it's really driving even us as the general day-to-day consumers to start to ask questions. And so one of the things that we are really excited about is seeing all of that magic start to happen. And those pressures are really causing everyone in the energy industry, upstream, midstream, and even downstream, to take action. A little bit about Project Canary. We really do, we are a data company, we're a technology company, and we do two simple things. We develop technology and sensors and partner with sensors such that operators in the fossil and biospaces can understand their methane emissions and mitigate them. And then we provide software and dashboards and software as a service such that folks can quantify actual leaks, measure them, monitor them, track them, and then also prove when those leaks are mitigated. And so there are a tremendous amount of technologies that are in this space now. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But all those technologies play a role. Not every well is the same. And what we've really learned is that there are different solutions for different wells, different ages that are in a different point in that curve. But what's really important is to measure and understand the actual data that's coming off of those locations. We believe in what's called the digital canopy. You know, California has made some news in investing in satellites to measure methane, but there is a variety from the space all the way down to the ground of ways to monitor and measure methane emissions. And we talk a lot about methane, again, because we believe, excuse me, it's the strong starting point. But frankly, there are sensors to measure ethylene, there are sensors to measure CO2, there are sensors to measure hydrogen as hydrogen hubs begin to build. And what's really important is how do we allow operators to take that data, put it into a control center, and then really allow them to net zero or even real zero. Chuck alluded to this a bit, but what we've used for the past couple decades is really emission factors to report on emissions in this industry. And the EPA average last year was a 0.454%. There have been several studies from EDF, from Stanford, S&P Global, and others that have said, you know what, we think that number might be a bit underestimated. And our thesis is if we can get down to fugitive methane emissions in the 0.2%, not the 0.454%, and hopefully not in what might be actual emissions of 2, 3, and 4%, we can make a significant impact in our climate today. Essentially, what we can do is the equivalent if California went from a 0.48% to a 0.2%, it would be the equivalent of taking about 8 million gas-powered cars off the road per year. And so this is a really interesting component. It does not change the way that gas is burned at the burner tip, but it does take the methane leaks out of the process to get to the burner tip. We often hear that this is a short-term problem, but we believe that while we are in this energy transition, it's important to address those leaks now. We really believe that we don't have time to wait, and the best way to do that is to measurement. This is a chart that was put out by S&P Global. They also fly satellites, and they have looked into what the methane intensity is for various basins across the country. Methane intensity is a fancy way of saying what's your leak rate. It's essentially the volume of your leak over the volume produced. And what you see is that it really varies across the country. And as we are making purchases in energy, it's important to know and understand where energy comes from and how much of the pollutants are actually going up into the atmosphere. We have seen a lot of action in the policy space around methane in the last couple of years. The federal government has a tremendous amount of activity going on around methane. And we really believe that the idea of measuring methane is the harmonizing factor across all of these rulemakings. Many of you are aware of the Inflation Reduction Act and what that does, and it offers, it's a huge bill with a tremendous amount of information and a tremendous amount of opportunity. With respect to methane specifically, there is quite a bit of direction to the EPA to revise their Subpart W rules to look at using empirical data instead of emission factors. It also, the BLM is looking at how you put royalties on emissions, not just production. There is an EPA methane rule ongoing in addition to the methane rulemaking for Subpart W that would be implemented by the IRA. We're also seeing the SEC take action. They have put forth the climate disclosure rule, which is already in the rulemaking process and really seeing a fair number of challenges up and down the space. And really, this is the federal government, but we're seeing this across the world. The European Union is tackling this issue as well. Canada, Brazil is interested in this. And so what we're finding is that globally, we have partners who are ready to step up, and we have partners who are really developing and trying to get there. And so the ability to measure and prove that we are cutting methane becomes really important. We are but one of many technologies, as I mentioned earlier, and I kind of love this slide because the reality is that we were using emission factors 20 years ago because the technology didn't really exist to be able to measure affordably, and it wasn't widely available. And with every kind of uptick in requirements and regulations at the federal level, we have seen the number of patents for technologies that can detect methane almost go in an exponential curve. And it's been really exciting to watch. And so what that has done is that has brought the cost down of these technologies, but it's also really made them much more available, and you can find the tool that you need. So a little bit about what we do. We have our digital canopy, which is our software where you can really take data coming in from a variety of different places, put it into a dashboard and really understand what's going on in your system. We also do certification where we will go out and assess a company's operations based on a 600 data point assessment based on petroleum engineering principles and how those operations impact the air, the water, the land, and the communities that surround them. We have a smart technology and a learning technology that will take what's going on a well pad and alert operators, quantify emissions, and help them to identify where those leaks are coming from. And finally, really looking at down the road when we are not as concerned about methane, at looking towards things like carbon sequestration, hydrogen, how can we be a measurement, reporting, and verification support system for the industry? A little bit more on the digital canopy, we really believe in a top down and bottom up. You know, we see satellites, there's drones, there's flyovers, there's regional approaches, and then there's data that is consistent and kind of every day, every second. Project Canary was based on direct measurement, which is where we would have 3 canaries, to Chuck's point, canary in the coal mine, a tool that helps to alert you when you have a problem. And so we would put 3 canaries up on any well pad that are triangulated specifically for the geography of that well pad and for the equipment that's on site. Those sensors are monitoring every second. They're averaged every minute, uploaded into a cloud every day. So it really gives operators actual real-time information as to what's going on. You may not need that on every well, but you can pair that with great satellite information. You can pair that with drive-bys and flyovers and really get a great picture of what's going on. And that sensor agnostic approach allows for folks in any situation to take advantage of measurement. I know I'm going long, so I'm going to kind of go fast through these. We do believe that quantification is really important, the ability to actually monitor not just when leaks happen, but to actually get an emissions profile and understand the volume of emittance. It's what's really going to help us go from, you know, the challenge we have now to really improving our industry in this industry. And we believe that this information allows companies to deploy capital appropriately. This is an example of a dashboard that any operator might see. That top line with all of the lines are the data coming in from each sensor. You'll notice that a lot of the leaks are intermittent, and that's one of the challenges in this industry, regardless of of whether it's fossil or a bioresource. And so what this allows operators to do is they understand the wind direction, they can understand the sensor data, and it helps to pinpoint equipment on site. And it also, in this upper right corner, you'll see that there are alerts that require the operator to annotate what happened. And so what it really does is it allows any operator to prove their emissions. And so this is an actual data from one of our operators. As you can see, they had a lot of noise going on, some spikes, some peaks. They pinpointed it. They made operational improvements. They were able to quantify their emissions, but they were also able to show and prove that their emissions were reduced. And so we really just believe that the measurement economy is here, and that in order to cut it and count it, you have to prove it. And that this proof of performance is really what we should expect of all operators, but also how we can really make a difference. And that's it.
Great. Am I back on again? Can you people hear me?
Yep, we got you, Chuck.
Great, thank you. Well, I did get a question about why am I facing away from the camera here? And that's because I've got two screens, and one screen is what I watch, and the other screen is what I have to talk into. So it gets two screens. But I will take any questions we have for Michelle right now. I have a couple myself, but we won't spend too long on this. We'll get to our next speaker, and then if we have time at the end, we'll circle back, and you'll be able to stay with us. Are there any questions for Michelle from the audience out there? Let's see if I can. Yeah, I don't see anything right now, but I'll just get started. Let's see. So I remember the argument some years ago about how certain climate pollutants have a global warming potential of 25, but other kinds of climate pollutants like methane have a global warming potential. Well, in case of methane, I think it's like 76 or 80, and then others are even higher than that, 300, 400, 500. So how do you make the case? Because I think California right now says everything is going to be on the 100-year time frame, and everything is measured. So methane has only a 25 global warming potential, when one could argue it should be 80 or even higher. So how do you guys feel about that? Doesn't the current 100-year time frame kind of dim the spotlight a little bit on your issue?
It absolutely does. And you know, to be fair, the global warming potentials are picked, and the 100-year versus the 25-year are often picked with the goal of, are you looking at the longer term or?
Uh-oh, you're frozen on us. Does anyone know what happened to Michelle?
The shorter term. You know, they can look at it in the short term. You do get to the 80 and, you know, 82 numbers for a global warming potential. We also recognize that, for example, when you look at an organization like the Air Resources Board, who picks a 100-year GPW, they are looking at a different picture, but they also are very understanding and aware of how methane plays into that role. And that's why you see methane task force. That's why you see, you know, kind of separate methane reductions and goals.
Well, in California, it has focused on short-lived climate pollutants with focused legislation. And I think there's some rethinking going on over there at CARB. In fact, today, earlier today, they had a workshop on the low carbon fuel standard. And it's clearly there's some things going on in the minds of CARB about how they might want to change the low carbon fuel standard. The one that really stuck out most to me is they're looking at maybe even reducing the amount of use of RNG, which are in renewable natural gas, which has some of the lowest carbon intensities currently available under the low carbon fuel standard, because they want to see that RNG used for other things and use other kinds of energy for powering vehicles like electrification. And to me, that doesn't make any sense, because you've got the lowest carbon intensity fuel available in California. And I know the focus right now of Canary is on fossil energy, but if there's concerns being, for an example, of dairies, where dairies are maybe having fugitive methane emissions, is there a use for your kind of technology and your kind of things, not only on fossil emissions, but also on biomethane emissions? I know yesterday CARB also announced the refocusing of methane emissions on landfills, for example. A big workshop coming up in a couple of weeks, I think. And that's going to be very interesting to pay attention to as to, well, so I mean, I guess my point is you really can't ignore biomethane. It maybe plays a lesser role, but maybe right now, but you got to start thinking about that. I assume you are.
Absolutely. And the bioresources, I wouldn't even say are a lower priority. I think it's just getting into the market. As you'll hear from a lot of companies where they're getting into a market, it's evolving and you have to start somewhere. And we started with fossil, which we felt was the biggest opportunity to make an improvement in the climate situation. But absolutely, Chuck, we are piloting with renewable natural gas facilities. We're piloting with landfills and really making sure that our algorithms are able to monitor plumes across those different structures and different facility geographies, if you will. But it's definitely the way we're moving.
Okay, good, very good. And maybe one last thing before I move on is, okay, so you're trying to make fossil energy less of an environmental concern. Do you ever get any criticism that you're kind of, helping maintain the fossil fuel industry, which many believe has been really kind of one of the reasons why we have climate change? How do you respond to that criticism, if there is any?
Oh, there's definitely that criticism, and it's a fair criticism. And our response is, look, we don't know how long we're going to be consuming fossils, but we are today. And even if the goal is ultimate electrification, we've seen studies come out from our utility friends that say, look, we're trying to get there, but natural gas is in play for at least, the next couple of years. And our point is simply that we can make an impact today. We can't afford to wait a few more years to be off of it. So while we are using it, let's use the cleanest version of we can.
Well, good. I see my pal Dan Noble's got his hands up, so if he's got a quick question, and I think, I got another question popping up from Steve McCorkle. So maybe we'll deal with those two. We still have time. We're going to go to about 4:45, and I'll come around to Steve Wertel after these next two questions. But after that's it. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So Michelle, really interesting technology. I mean, I remember working with the EPA like 20 years ago for performance-based regulation and real-time monitoring. Now it seems to be coming to pass. Do you see this changing the way regulations are put out as well as monitored? Not only, mainly for methane. Are you looking at like VOCs in California and stuff like that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you're exactly right, Dan. We have technology now, and not just ours, but many others that are actually able to measure and identify these. And so regulation is a slow and often frustratingly challenging truck to move in some cases. And so we do find that we can be much more agile and effective with local community regulation. But we are also seeing the change slowly, even at the state and federal levels. And so when you have a state like California that has been very proactive in the space through agencies like the Air Resources Board and the CEC, and even public utility commissions who are authorizing, utilities to still procure significant volumes of natural gas, you have the ability to start to manage these in a way where we can see improvement. And so I do see regulations starting to shift, but that, as you probably know, will take many years and potentially lawsuits, and we will get there, which is why we really want to focus now, because by encouraging producers to do this on their own for all the reasons that they might, there can be an impact made.
For some, the wheels of government move slowly. For others, the wheels of government move too fast. So,
right.
One question I've got from Steve McCorkle, one of the attendees. A high percentage of methane leaks from oil and gas are from stranded gas flares that go out and vent raw methane until detected. Using some of the technology you described, the appropriate personnel could be alerted as the problems occurred, which would be great. These flares are supposed to be automatically self-reignited if the flame goes out, but apparently that is not happening. Do you know why these flares are not automatically reigniting, and does Canary have a plan to address this?
No, and Steve, it's a great point. And the idea of why they aren't reigniting is something that we have seen some of our operators try to deal with. But the fact that they are alerted as soon as it happens allows them to get out faster. And so those huge volumes of methane being released into atmosphere can hopefully be shortened. The lifetime of that leak can be shortened. We are also seeing flaring and venting restrictions starting to come out at state regulation levels and state laws. Texas, New Mexico, North Dakota have all implemented some version of, requiring reduction in flaring and venting, same with Colorado. And so this technology really allows operators to know immediately and be able to address it. But I don't have an answer to the reigniting challenges.
Great, thank you. Well, let's move on to Steve Wortel. As I mentioned when I first started, we had Steve in last year, I think, to talk about his project that was in development at that time. And it's, as far as I know, it's the only solid waste to gasification facility operating in California, because California has, and I'm going to go in and try to explain the legislation and the regulations, but it discourages, in fact, there's been some people that have just kind of gone out of business because they couldn't site one in California. But Steve has a background in civil and environmental engineering. Steve is a business development executive with 30 years of experience in water and wastewater markets. He has been involved with other companies, and he's seen $20 million business development budgets, and really is focusing now on trying to see if there's a door opening for these kinds of technologies to help California reduce emissions and manage its solid waste. I know it can be a very controversial issue, but I think I'm going to be looking for Steve, and I may ask him a question related to this at the end. Is okay, we got an RD&D facility growing. What's the next step? And hopefully he'll provide us an answer with that. So Steve, welcome. Thank you very much for joining our show. And I look forward to hearing more of where you are now that your facility is actually up and running, and how is it running?
Well, thanks, Chuck, and thanks for inviting me back to speak again. I will talk about how the facility is running, but it is running very well. Last year at this time, we were just getting started. So now we've got a year of operation under our belt, and we've accomplished many goals. So this is the facility here. I don't think I had this snappy picture last year to show you, just to give you a sense or how close it is to downtown LA. It's on a site owned by Southern California Gas, and the facility itself processes about a ton an hour of biomass feedstock, so about 24 tons a day. And we are fully supported not only by SoCalGas, but also the South Coast Air Quality Management District, who is interested in our technology for its ability to produce zero emission transportation fuel, specifically hydrogen. So over the last,
Steve, you're in your presentation view. You might want to switch to slide view.
oh, I didn't, I thought it would just show that. Okay.
You're good.
Good now? Okay. So over the past year, what we've done is confirmed the mechanical and thermal integrity of these systems. Operating chemical conversion or biomass conversion at temperatures north of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit has many challenges that we discovered along the way, but we were able to overcome those and have now essentially de-risked the technology from a mechanical and thermal standpoint. And we've had Leidos reviewing our operation, and they've written a report testifying to that fact. Our next steps now are to move on and test as many commercial feedstocks as we can, as well as start to optimize the process for both the biogas production and then from there, hydrogen production. And I'll put this notion out now. The site that you see our facility at, our agreement with Southern California Gas ends at the end of this year. So we are going to be moving this facility. It's one of the advantages of having a standard design factory built skid mounted system is that we can unbolt it from the slab, pick it up and move it to another site. We've got a few candidate sites that we're looking at, but the decision hasn't been made yet. So if there's anyone out there that is interested in potentially having this system at a facility that they operate, we will move it to your facility at our cost and operate it there. Just reviewing last year why this technology even exists or what our business case is. is that there's really this push and pull, as I describe it, of legislation to, first of all, be pushing feedstocks away from traditional uses like biomass power plants, like landfills, in particular SB 1383 with its landfill diversion requirements. And on the other side of the equation, we've got a pull from the LCFS program and now the Inflation Reduction Act and its production credits, providing incentives to produce these fuels. And what we need as a society is conversion technologies in the middle that can utilize those on the left to produce those on the right. And we know that there's lots and lots of biomass available in California. Here's the oft-cited study by Kafka and Williams that shows we're generating in this state on the order of 100,000 tons a day of waste feedstock when you consider all of the material that can be extracted from the forest to reduce fuel for wildfire risk. And most of that material is lignocellulosic, which means it can't be managed in an anaerobic digestion process, making it ideal for this type of a system. So again, just a little bit of background. We're talking about biogenic feed here, which originates with a plant, originates with the photosynthetic combination of atmospheric CO2 with water and sunlight to produce carbohydrates that take on many forms depending on the plant. You have cellulose, sugar, lignans, etc., plus oxygen. And that's biogenic feedstock. Then that biogenic biomass becomes the feedstock for our process. It is a pyrolysis process, so it operates at high temperature, zero oxygen environment. Traditional gasification technologies utilize some oxygen to produce a more traditional syngas. Our focus is operating high temperature, slow pyrolysis to maximize the non-condensable gases. What we typically wind up with then is a gas that has a calorific value about half that of pipeline quality natural gas, or on the order of 500 to 600 BTUs per cubic foot. And it's largely comprised of these four molecules in different proportions depending on how the system's operated. We also produce a biocarbon, also known as biochar, which Josiah did a great job of describing, so I'll hardly have to talk about that at all. But those are the two products that we produce, and generally speaking, the carbon tends to move about half and half in each direction, half into the elemental carbon char and half into the gas. But of course, that depends on the fixed carbon and ash that come with the feedstock. So I want to talk about the range of renewable energy products that we can produce from that biogas that we generate. So beginning with the biogas then provides a flexible renewable energy platform. So if we take these ag residuals, demo wood, biomass from forest management, et cetera, through the process and generate that biogas can then be used to produce steam, for instance, in steam flooding operations. It can be used to produce natural gas for any number of applications, such as power for campuses. And it could even potentially be used in a fuel cell to decarbonize the cloud, for instance, and use that technology in a server farm. And again, because we're able to sequester the carbon in the biocarbon, the entire process is carbon negative and the energy that's produced is carbon negative. Now we can also take that biogas and upgrade it by separating the hydrogen and potentially also converting the CO, carbon monoxide, into more hydrogen using steam. We could produce renewable hydrogen then that can be used in many different mobility applications: fuel cell electric cars, trucks, buses, trains, forklifts, etc. And those applications are growing rapidly in California in particular. Now, those are the typical applications that we've been working on with the technology, but lately we've been getting a lot of inquiries and calls about how this process could work with anaerobic digestion. And through those conversations, we've really found that the process complements anaerobic digestion nicely to increase RNG production. Let me go through the strategy and approach for why that is the case. What we're finding, or what we're hearing from digester operators, is that nutrient removal is an increasing problem for these digesters with limited options for nutrient disposal. And I'm primarily talking here about dairy digesters, manure digesters, food waste digesters, and even green waste digesters. After anaerobic digestion, the process is incomplete, and there is a digest state that's left over that traditionally has been used as a fertilizer for land application. But the problem is that that land application can create excess nutrients that have the potential to contaminate local ground and surface water supplies. And so dewatering is typically one of the approaches that's utilized to help solve that problem, but dewatering doesn't solve the entire problem, because we still have nutrients either in the dewatering liquors that are left behind and or in the digest state, which may be used for land application and composting. So these, in many parts of the country, these anaerobic digestion facilities are hemmed in by managing the nutrients that they generate. So pyrolysis can help solve the problem of solids management by implementing the pyrolysis process. And typically these feedstocks are going to have a high moisture content that we're going to want to reduce before pyrolysis. And so they'll typically be a drying step up front. That could be mechanical drying, or it could be solar drying using sun and wind to dry those feedstocks and produce that biogas and biocarbon that I discussed earlier. But in this case, we're essentially transferring the nitrogen problem into the biogas, because the nitrogen becomes volatilizes with the biogas. And if we want to recycle that biogas, for instance, back to the digesters, we run the risk of overloading the digesters with ammonia and creating toxicity conditions. So what we've come up with is a proprietary process to remove the ammonia from the biogas and create a fertilizer product that can be then used for sale. And in that case, then we can utilize that biogas to increase the RNG production of the entire facility. We need a methanation process, though, to convert that biogas into methane, and that can be done either chemically or biologically. And again, returning the biogas to the digester is one biological methanation approach that these opportunities that we're talking about are considering. And we could take this whole process one step further. Now that we've got a fertilizer product that could potentially be used, we can utilize that to grow fast-growing plants. Fast-growing plants would include things like miscanthus, bamboo, hemp, or potentially even algae, so that we can in real time be removing atmospheric carbon that can then be brought into the pyrolysis process to produce more biogas, to produce more RNG. And with this approach, we can produce multiples of what the previous digestion process was able to produce with RNG, and we don't need to bring in external fertilizers to do that. We can utilize the nutrients that were a problem for the process, making them into a strategy for a solution. Now, with respect to the biochar, it's again primarily elemental carbon that could be used as a soil amendment, as a substitute, as a coal substitute, as Josiah indicated, and that could be interesting in particularly difficult to decarbonize industries, and I'll mention one shortly. And of course, the carbon negative attributes can be sold as voluntary CO2 offsets. So as a soil amendment, this material has many benefits. Because it acts like a sponge in the soil, it will reduce irrigation needs, which could be less irrigation water required, improves nutrient retention, which can reduce fertilizer, as well as reducing nutrient runoff, which leads to non-point pollution problems. and it enhances soil microbial activity, creating a healthier soil. And all of these lead to increased yields for the plants that are grown in biochar amended soils. And then, of course, there's the carbon sequestration aspect of it. Again, because of the way that this material is formed, it is recalcitrant, will not revert back into CO2 or methane. So it will be sequestered as elemental carbon in the soil for centuries. And in California, this biocarbon can substitute for fossil coal in difficult to decarbonize industries like cement manufacturing. Little known fact that California cement manufacturers import about 900,000 tons of coal and petroleum coke used to generate heat in the kilns that produce the cement. This biocarbon would be a very interesting replacement for those fossil coal products. And California has recognized that. The state has recently issued Senate Bill 596, which is a low carbon cement standards, which compels CARB to develop standards to reduce the carbon intensity of cement produced in the states over the next 20 years or so. And as I mentioned, this technology is operating at commercial scale here in downtown LA. If anyone would like to see this facility, please contact me. My information is below. And if you are interested in working with us or partnering with us on relocating this equipment, I would certainly be interested in hearing from you as well. Thanks, Chuck.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Steve. It's great hearing from you, and we may have to bring you back every year just to kind of give us a sense of how where CORE is going.
Well, I hope we have as much to talk about next year as we did this year.
Yeah, well, I'm opening it up to anybody who has a question. I'm trying to navigate here. I don't see everybody on the. Oh yeah, there's a woman named Mary. Oh no, that's who is Mary Giardo asking a question of? If I could ask Jose.
I think she had her hand up briefly and then lowered it. I'm not sure. That was a while back.
A while back, sorry. Okay, good. I'll just move forward then. So one question I have, Steve, is it's not related to my issue of, I'm a solid waste guy, but I'm working on solid waste issues. I have 25 years with waste management. I kind of get the issue, but as I alluded to, right now, California's legislation really discourages gasification and pyrolysis for taking in mixed solid waste. And I was wondering if you've looked at a way to try to get around that, either by by separating the waste into its component parts and then treating it perhaps as a recyclable material, or have you formed any alliances with other similar companies that are involved in pyrolysis and gasification? Do you have any plans to approach CalRecycle or people in the legislature that have concerns about that? See if there might be some way to look at the experience you've gained working the facility in Los Angeles to see if there might be Los Angeles, for example, the city and county have been long-term proponents of these technologies to handle municipal solid waste, but it just has been very difficult to get anything started. You're kind of unique in that regard.
Yeah. So one thing, let me make clear that we're not processing MSW in this facility, not a mixed municipal solid waste. We would be looking at segregated biomass feedstocks. So construction and demolition wood, green waste, forest thinning debris, low moisture agricultural waste, orchard removals, nutshells, etc. In fact, next week we're going to start processing pistachio shells here. So we're looking at those types of biomass feedstocks. And as I understand it, SB 498 allows for a certain amount of that to help meet the SB 1383 diversion requirements.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's our pathway to success to get this commercially viable.
Good. If there's any more questions here for Steve, I know. Oh yeah, go ahead. Is it Josiah or Hosea? I used to have a friend named that spelled it the same way and it said Hosea, and so I was calling you that. But what's the proper pronunciation of your name?
I don't know. I didn't make up I just call Josiah as usual, but Hosea is fine too. I'll answer that.
Good. So you had your hand up, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think with the the MSW, so this is a question for Steve. This is increasingly an area of interest for me. I know that the process of pyrolysis destroys pathogens, that's pretty obvious, as well as toxic organic compounds, of which PFAS has been of growing concern. And I'm wondering, it just seems like it could be a really interesting application if done appropriately to help kind of break that cycle of PFAS re-entering the system from municipal solid waste, biosolids, and others. And I'm wondering how much of that you've dealt with.
It's an excellent point, and we've done a tremendous amount of work on paper with this.
Okay.
We actually have some concepts to deal with PFAS and all of its smaller breakdown components. I'm struggling for the word, but in our process, we've got a couple of strategies that we want to test, and we're going to be looking at that in our next year of testing, particularly if we can find a partner that can help us with that process. But we've got sort of a couple of concepts. One is to destruct it, and one is to remove it from the system.
Thank you.
We don't have any, Michelle had to leave for a family issue, so she's gonna, but if anybody has any questions for Michelle Applegate with Canary, provide them to myself or to the organization, and we'll get them to her, and we'll get your answers back to you. I think I had another question here for Josiah. Now, right now, you're relying on the voluntary market for carbon credits, as I understand it. And as you pointed out, that's kind of an uncertain market. It kind of goes up and down. And, ultimately, California has been kind of in the lead of establishing a regulatory defined markets in terms of the low carbon fuel standard, the cap and trade. And is there something more that along those lines that you would like to see California implement to provide greater value in your biochar product?
Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about the 45Q, especially since the Inflation Reduction Act just dramatically changed the landscape on what the 45Q can and can't do. I mean, basically just bumped up the numbers. The 45Q is not applicable for biochar production at the moment, primarily because it's focused on carbon that was already released. You're capturing the carbon theoretically like moments after it was released. And with the biochar process, the carbon was never actually released. So you don't have the release that would then require the capture. So, and there's other elements, there's other reasons why the biochar has a hard time fitting within the box of 45Q. But that's one example on the federal level. I think there's others that at the federal level, the feds, they're working on quite a few number of things that could be applicable. At the state level, the first thing that comes to mind would be CARB, would be if a biochar carbon accounting methodology could be adopted at the state level, that could have significant impact. I put some huge caveats on that. I think that the California cap and trade market is it's a mix of kind of emission reduction and carbon dioxide removal. And right now the price, right now the credits that we're getting are in the category of durable carbon removal, which is a kind of a niche category where we're able to get $150 per ton CO2 or more. Numbers that are an order of magnitude greater than what the California cap and trade system is trading at. So there's a couple parts. Like one, I think if California Air Resource Board was to work on developing a biochar carbon accounting methodology, that could be very useful. But then there's some other elements to that as well as to how to make it useful.
Seems to me if you're putting carbon into the soil that's durable for 100 years or more, there ought to be some kind of credit system that could be done under cap and trade. I'm not an expert on cap and trade, but I would think that would be something you would want to pursue, or at least to have some serious conversations about.
Yeah, and in a very general sense, it's very straightforward. But when you get into the details, there's a lot to work out there. There's a lot to work out. As I think I'm forgetting the name. I think it was Kevin asked some great questions about like kind of the consistency or the composition of the biochar, potentially varying composition and how that relates to the carbon sequestered. Those are all things that are being managed in the voluntary market, but they need to be managed with great attention to detail. For instance, the biochar that you put in the ground, it's not as though 100% of that carbon is 100% stable for exactly 100 years, and then it goes up. It's a decay rate, right? And that decay rate is incredibly slow as compared to the organic materials it was created from. But it is a decay rate. And so there has to be an accepted, by all parties involved, an accepted method of determining that decay rate per given material. And so the IPCC has developed a methodology. I guess it's kind of a methodology with training wheels, guidelines for methodology that I think are pretty applicable, as well as there are now 3 methodologies in the voluntary market that provide templates for how to deal with the assessment of that decay rate and how, what sort of carbon equivalent would be allocated to the biochar.
You must be using some kind of platform to get voluntary credits. I mean, there has to be an organization through. There used to be a California voluntary organization, but I haven't dealt with them in years. I don't even know if they still exist. But
Climate Action Reserve.
Climate Action Reserve, yeah, right.
Climate Action Reserve is developing a biochar carbon accounting methodology. I'm on the working group for that methodology. We were hoping to have it done this year, but it's looking like we should have the internal draft ready soon, and we're aiming for a public, a draft ready for public comment. I got to be careful, like I don't want to like put too many promises, but next year, it'll be next year, hopefully in the earlier half of next year before we have a draft ready for public comment.
There were various other issues that were being thought about for the cap and trade program years ago. They always said that was the first step, is to get a protocol adopted by the Climate Action Reserve. And once that gets out there, then that CARB can step in and take a look at it and see if they might have more of a regulatory requirement. Because if you graduate to the cap and trade, that puts a burden on the obligated parties to find ways to buy credits for projects such as yours.
And that's exactly the pathway. That's the pathway that we anticipate, is that the California Air Resource Board, it'll be a lot easier for them to get involved after the Climate Action Reserve has developed their methodology. Sure. We anticipate that that's the likely outcome. And I just wanted to note too that the Climate Action Reserve methodology is being funded by the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Grant. Yeah. And then also CAL FIRE created a matching funds to help pay for that, because of the wood utilization, the excess forest biomass wood utilization potentials.
You have discussions with the Sierra Club on any concerns they might have about the biochar production and from forest materials?
I've had some discussions with Sierra Club, yes.
I won't go any further and ask on the tenor of them, but
yeah, it's positive and negative. I mean, it depends on who you talk to there. It's not a monolith. There's multiple different things, and there's there is generally a tendency to be anti-biomass power plant. But then there also has been concessions from a number of folks with the Sierra Club that, hey, we love what you're doing, we just don't like the whole biomass power part. And I don't want to put their words in their mouth for them, but we've had many different conversations. It's not a monolith, and yeah, it'd be interesting to have more.
Certainly wish you and Steve on your respective technologies good luck. I don't see any more questions. Hussein, do we have any more people out there at all, or are we pretty much done? I kind of run out of questions.
There are a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Oh, I don't have the Q&A. Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah, there was.
Oh, I see them. I got them. For Steve, besides air permits, what other permits does a facility like yours need at the pilot stage?
Yeah, when somebody finds out you're doing something like this, they all come out of the woodwork wanting a permit of one kind or another. I think at last count, we have over 20 permits for this facility. So besides air, there's water, there's solid waste, There's fire, there's permits from the city, from the county, from Public Works. Hazardous waste permits, even though we don't have any hazardous waste, we have to demonstrate that we don't. Building permits to build it. So there's a lot.
Welcome to California.
Um,
Go ahead, Uzziah.
yeah, there was a question here that was that Hussein directed to me, and it was about are forest residues your company's greatest feedstock, or does your company use other sources? What can you tell us about the properties of biochar from different sources? And I think the IPCC did a great job of kind of breaking down some of that, and others. I'm referring to that again because the carbon accounting has come up in it, and I want to kind of house it with that. But they basically break down into pyrolysis and gasification. Gasification is basically pyrolysis with one extra little kick to it. And then you kind of break it down after that. You get those basic two categories, and then you can have kind of temperature. So above 500 degrees C is very different than say 350 degrees Celsius. And I forget exactly the different tiers they have, but it's 2 or 3, I think. And then generally with your feedstock types, you've got you got your general woody biomass, and there's some minor differences, but most woody biomass has pretty similar characteristics if you run it through the same process. If you're cooking it in pyrolysis above 500 degrees C, woody biomass is going to look very, very similar again and again and again. And then you have, when you get into municipal solid waste or biosolids, it's just really reflective on whatever the feedstock was that went in is really going to be reflective on what comes out the other side, as far as your mineral composition and your potential heavy metals contents.
I remember there was issues years ago that concerned about municipal wood waste that might have various types of chemical treatments on them, like treated wood waste and this kind of thing.
Yes.
There was some concern that they might be hazardous, and then therefore you'd have to have the bioenergy plant get a hazardous waste facility permit, which they weren't that much interested in doing. What has been your experience with that issue of treated wood waste?
Well, Steve was talking about how fun that is, the permits up the wazoo. And then for the biochar utilization, I'll get to Baitong. I hope I'm not butchering it too bad. Baitong Chen answered in the Q&A here about the other uses with biochar that have potential contaminants. There are other uses if the contaminant level makes it a risk to utilize in food production. There are other avenues for it to be utilized, such as asphalt and concrete. So like construction and demolition materials make a great candidate for reutilizing in the built world by putting them into asphalt and concrete, which can be very large resources for utilization. And then it usually kind of negates the word biochar because you're going to be combusting it, but then you can take these biocarbons and utilize them for, as Steve was mentioning, steel production, and other things like that. So, and the steel industry is very interested in utilization of biocarbons, and it might be a good avenue when there's potential contamination risk. But then Steve, maybe over to you for the permitting parts of using that kind of stuff.
Well, it's going to depend on what the contaminant is that's been used to preserve the wood. So, creosote, generally speaking, is organic and will be broken down in the process. Pentachlorophenol, which is also another chemical that's used, is going to be dangerous to the equipment from the chlorides that it could produce. And then what's the other one they use? Chromated copper arsenates. Now you're talking about problems in the biochar. So, there's different solutions depending on what the treated wood was treated with.
Right. Okay, well, I'm out of questions. We're going to be able to end this 5 minutes early, which I probably won't be that many objections to. So why don't we just, if we were to had an audience, we'd be asking for a round of applause to all of our participants, Uzziah and Steve and Michelle. And so I appreciate your contribution. Great. I've certainly learned a lot. I always do when I'm in discussion, so it's great. I wish you both the best of luck. And if there's anything we can do to help you move your projects and your technology along, we'd love to be able to do that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chuck.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Chuck. Thanks to the whole team.
Thank you. Have a good flight tomorrow.
Oh, and for the audience, don't forget we're doing this tomorrow too. So don't forget. Oh, and for the audience, don't forget we're doing this tomorrow too. So don't forget to come back. Oh, there you go. He's got the slide up. Good. All right.
Yeah, and we'll have the bios of the speakers available hopefully by tomorrow morning. So if you can check that out on EPA's website, and then yeah, we'll make sure that everybody gets those. So if they want to contact speakers in the future, they can.
I'm sure that the speakers that would be very much interested in hearing any questions or inquiries or requests for more information about their technology. So we would certainly encourage that. That's the reason why we do this thing, is to try to get the information about what people are doing out there.
Great. Well, I guess we'll see you all tomorrow then.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.